Now, I'm the type of person who can handle some constructive criticism. Someone looks at me and goes, Steven, like, I see what you're doing, and I think you could be doing it better by doing X, Y, and Z. I can hear what they're saying. Even if it's hard, I can hear those nuggets on how I could be better. And when it comes to being better on reaching people, on doing things more effective, I'm really open to it. I want that. I just want to be better in doing all of those things. So I've always put it on people who are around me, whether it's students, whether it's leaders, whether it's, just coworkers, to say, hey, if you see something that I'm doing and you think I could do it better by doing whatever it might be, I want to hear it. I want to know, this is how I'm going to be better. This is your job to speak into my life to make me just better. Now, I've always put that on students. I've always said, listen, you guys are the people who are going to make me keep my job, basically. And so I've told them, like, hey, if you see something that I could be doing better, please let me know, because you guys hear it over and over and over again every week, sometimes twice a week, maybe even 3 times a week. I don't know. But I remember this one time specifically where I told the student, we've been meeting for a while, and I was like, listen, you're a good guy, you're a leader, people listen to you, you're smart, you're all these things, right? When you hear what I say on a Wednesday night, on a Sunday morning, whatever it might be, I want you to be grading me. I want you to really take notes and saying, is he being effective? And one night after group, he comes up to me and he says, hey, you have a second so we can talk for a minute, after everything? And I was like, yeah, for sure. Let me finish up right here, and we'll find a spot and we'll talk about something. And I'm thinking in my head, oh man, what's going on? Does he have something to tell me? Maybe he's stressed out, or maybe he has some big news, or maybe it's even oh man, something he said during the message really is pushing him to do something. So I'm okay, I have this in my mind. I'm okay, all right, let's see what it is. I'm prepping myself. And so finally, I get done with whatever I'm doing at that moment, and we find a quiet place apart from the group. And I'm like, so what's up, man? What's going on? And I remember him looking at me straight in the face, and he's just so, your messages and all that stuff, yeah, you kind of suck at that. And I remember at that moment, I was so caught off guard. I don't know what my face looked like. I don't know what my, body language was saying, but inside it felt red hot. That fight or flight thing that goes on. Well, it was in full fight mode. I just wanted to fight him at that moment. And I'm so swallow my ego. I'm trying to swallow my pride and really listen to what he has to say. And I'm just okay. So what I hear you saying is that I suck. Do you want to explain a little bit? What do you mean by that? And he's you're just not very good. Again, trying to swallow my pride, putting my ego aside. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? Can you give me some examples? What are you talking about? And I remember him saying things okay, well, when you give a message, and you tell a story or something, no one really knows where you're going with that. No one really knows what your point is. And I'm listening, and I'm okay, I don't think that's the case, and I don't think that everybody thinks that. Maybe you do, which is fine, but finally I'm okay, so what could I be doing better? And he's just I don't know. And again, this fight or flight thing is kicking in again. I'm you're really making this hard for me. I want to hear you, but when you just say that I suck and then don't have any real feedback, it's kind of frustrating. And so I'm trying to ask more questions. So what would you want to see? What would make people feel connected? What would make people feel like they're getting it? And he's well, maybe if you change the subject matter a little bit, maybe if you talk more about the early church, or maybe you talked more about doctrine, about how we are sinful people, and this whole idea of the divinity of Jesus. Maybe if you talked more about those things, it would land a lot better. And in my head, I'm okay, I think I'm starting to see a pattern. That this really isn't a group thing, but this is more of a you thing, which is fine. I'm hearing what you're saying, but just don't say that I suck and that, everybody's lost because again, I just want to fight at that moment. But I was like, okay, so you think like the thing that I talk, what is it that I talk about? And he's like, well, you always talk about relationships. You're always talking about how Jesus loves people and how there's this all like community thing going on, and how we should love God and love others. And what about the deep theology? What about the deep, stuff that we should be knowing, again, like the Trinity or church history? What about all of that stuff? And again, in my head, I'm trying to process this, and I'm like, okay, so loving God and loving others is something that you don't want to do. But I have to tell you, you aren't being very loving right now. You aren't being very godly right now. I don't think that, like, no amount of theology will help you be better loving right now, other than just being loving. And so in my head, I'm just like, again, processing this. Hopefully it's not coming out on my face, but I'm just like, I just want to fight right now. And this story sticks out in my head because I think it's a common misconception of what's going on in real life, or what's going on inside the church, is that we feel that there's been some type of separation between loving and knowing God. That when it comes to relationships, that's one thing. But when it comes to loving God, that's another thing. And you can think about it like this. Like when you have a friendship, when you have, someone that you're, acquaintances with, and you're like, oh man, this would be a good time to talk about Jesus, we get nervous, don't we? We're like, I don't know what to say though, because there's that one part of like, okay, I don't want to make Jesus look bad. Yeah, okay, I get that. But then there's the other part of like, but what will they think of me? Will they then think of me as that weird Christian guy? Will they then think of me of like, why are you talking about Jesus at a time like this? Will they then just look at me weird? Like we have these questions of like, as soon as we have this relationship and we want to bring in Jesus, how will they view me? And sometimes we just land on like, well, I'm just going to love them. I'm just going to love them as much as possible and not bring in Jesus. And then there's that other side where it's like, people are like, well, to hell with relationships. I have this relationship with Jesus and I don't care about what they think. I'm just going to share the truth no matter how it comes off. And like, I think when you look at both of those things, of this idea of like, I'm just going to love people but not share Jesus, and this whole thing about I'm just going to share Jesus regardless of how it makes people feel, regardless of how many relationships I break or lose, I think we're both kind of missing the bigger picture of it. Because again, Jesus was this guy who was full of truth and full of grace, and yet when he had these relationships where he had to talk about God, they were deepening. And they're, polarizing in some sense, but he always had love behind those meanings. He always had love behind what he was actually doing. So how do we actually go about this? How do we have relationships that are so God-centered that makes people want to hear the good news? And how do we have the good news come into these relationships where they change people's lives? Because I think that's what we ultimately want to see. Now, when it came to this question of how do I share Jesus? How do I share Jesus in these relationships? I used to get so freaked out because again, those ideas and those thoughts of like, oh man, what are they going to think of me? Am I going to represent Jesus wrong? Oh my gosh, if I share just the truth, am I going to break this relationship? Like all those things would come into my mind. But the thing that I noticed as time went on, and I still felt this anxiety, I still felt this like, how am I going to do this? I realized that when I said, or when I asked, how do I share Jesus with people? The real question I was really asking is, how do I show people that I'm a Christian? And those are really two different things. Because when I say, I want to show Jesus to these people, and I want to show them that I'm a Christian. When I say that I want to show them that I want to be a Christian, it means that I want to show them that, hey, I go to church. Hey, I read my Bible. Hey, you should trust me when I speak into your life because, well, I'm a Christian. And of course, because I'm a Christian, I know some theology and I know some apologetics, so I have some real authority when it comes to speaking into your life. But when I talk about being a Jesus follower, when I want to share Jesus in or with people, I'm saying something really different than just, hey, I go to church, I read my Bible, I do all these things. I'm a Christian. When I say like I want to push Jesus into the conversation, I want to share Jesus, I'm saying something way more in depth than just what I do. While all those things might be true about who I am, when I start to share Jesus, it means that I'm rubbing shoulders with the people around me where I don't need to say much, that my actions start to tell the story. Sharing Jesus is living a life that's transformed, and it's not perfect, but it's consistent. That when I wrong people, I'm quick to say that I've wronged them. And that when they're struggling, I'm quick to be by their side. And that I'm also quick to listen before I speak. You see, the community that we want to build, the community is where Jesus is at the center and we share over and over again of how good he is. Maybe not through our words all the time, but how we act. Again, I don't want to tell people that I'm a Christian. I want to show people Jesus. Again, two different things. And when it comes to truth, and when it comes to loving and serving and caring for people around you, what we might call community, when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? Well, if you remember that it's actually two, and the two actually make up the one. It says, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, soul, and strength, and to love others. To love God and to love others, that's the greatest commandment. It's two things, but what the two things make is the one thing. You see, when it comes to loving God and loving others, it's not just this love, right? We just got to love our neighbors. But no, this loving God and loving others is really deep theology. And it's something that we don't always get right the first time or the second time or the third time. Or we do it right one time, but it looks completely different this next time. When it comes to loving God and loving others, you can know all the stuff about God. You can know all the church history. You can know all the deep theology. You can know all the apologetics. But it doesn't mean anything until you start representing Jesus to the people around you. When you really start to share Jesus and not that you're just a Christian. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always wondered this is why are we called to love first? Why are we called to love first instead of, the greatest commandment is to serve. The greatest commandment is to do the dishes or give your money away or just hug people. Why is the first thing that we're called to do to love? And the reason I think it's the first thing that we were called to do is because it's one of the hardest things to do. I mean, to love, what does that look like? It doesn't always look the same. I mean, you can say yeah, I get it. We love each other. We love our neighbors. But when we love our neighbors, are we then rude to the stranger? Are we then rude to the waiter who's serving us? Because I think that's also telling a story that you're not consistent. You say, yeah, I'll love my neighbor. Oh, you got my order wrong. What are you, a stupid idiot? It doesn't make sense. You've lost it. You're not consistent in all those things. So, I mean, even think about it are you mean to your sibling? Are you judging or rude to a stranger? All those things. Love is the hardest thing to be consistent at because it always looks different. Love is something that you just can't check off. It's very specific for specific situations. I know that you can't say that I know that I've been loving because I've done the dishes. I know that I've been loving because I didn't hit my brother or I didn't hit my sister today. Love is one of the most contextual things you will ever come across. Meaning that it'll look different from minute to minute, from hour to hour, from day to day, from person to person. Love is going to look different to everyone, in every circumstance, in every situation. That we all have our own stuff and that people are messy. But when we love those messy people, when I realize that I'm a messy person and people love me, this is what real beautiful community looks like. A community of people doing life together because that's what we've been created to do. I mean, it's one of our anchors. And the reason it's one of our anchors is because it's such a powerful concept that you can't do life alone. And not only that, you can't let others do life alone. Because we were built for community. I mean, from the beginning, when God created everything from nothing, he uses language like we and our and us. And it's right there in Genesis. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over the creatures that are moving along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And when I look at this, and when I see that us and we and our kind of language, I think it's more than just a royal we, but I think it's pointing to us that God is a community himself. That there is this three in oneness, that there is always this, this bonding experience of like someone loving someone else and not having to create out of a need, that he never had to create something else to love them. He never had to create something else to serve them. But God had always been a community. And we were created for community. And it shouldn't really be a shock to know that, because again, if God is community, well then, why would it be such a surprise that we were also created for community? And so the conversation that we're going to be unfolding for the next couple of weeks is all about community. Of what is that exactly? Like, what does that actually look like? What does it look like to commune with God? What does it look like to commune with others? And what does it look like to really have community with yourself? I mean, that's a big question. You're with yourself 24/7. You're having these conversations day in and day out. But what does it look like to commune with yourself? How do you recharge? How do you do all those things? So we're going to be looking at community, that you were created for community, that God is part of his own community, and that he's created out of an overflow. So in this new series called Commune, we're going to be asking those questions. What is community? That you were created for community, but what kind of community are you creating?